The Wyoming wind did not just blow, it screamed across the frozen plains of Laramie. It sounded like a widow wailing at a fresh grave. The month was October. The year was 1888. The air felt like the dead of a ghost's winter. The sky hung low. It was a heavy, suffocating sheet of gray lead. It pressed down on the Medicine Bow Mountains. The weight was crushing. Elias Thorne stood on his porch. He was a man carved from the very timber he lived in. Elias was only 34 years old, but the frontier had stolen his youth a decade ago. He wore a dark, faded vest. It had survived years of hard labor. It had seen drought. It had survived the great die-up of 1886 and 1887. That was the winter that broke the back of the West. Hundreds of thousands of cattle had perished across the open range. Wealthy men became beggars overnight. Elias had survived, but only barely. His shirt was stained with grease. It carried the scent of wood smoke and sweat. A simple neckerchief was tied around his throat. It was his only shield against the cutting wind behind him. The cabin door creaked. The hinges were rusty and tired. A little girl stepped out. She was 6 years old. Her name was Hattie. She was the only reason Elias Thorne still drew a breath. She had her mother's eyes. They were bright and intelligent. She had Sarah's stubborn chin. She possessed a quiet, resilient grace. Hattie clutched a worn rag doll. The doll was made from scraps of her mother's old wedding dress. "Daddy, the stove is getting cold," she whispered. Her voice trembled like a dry leaf. Elias looked down at his daughter. A sharp, jagged pang of guilt pierced his chest. He had promised Sarah that Hattie would never face the cold alone. Today, he feared he was breaking that promise. He tried to smile. The smile was a hollow mask. It was an aching lie. "I know, honey," he said. His voice was raspy. He reached down. He brushed a strand of hair from her cold forehead. "The woodpile is low. I'll bring in more in a minute. Go back inside where it's safe. Hattie, the wind has teeth today." He turned toward the empty woodshed. His stomach growled, "Miss." It was a dull, persistent ache. Then, something caught his eye. A dark shape was moving. It was far off in the frozen pasture. It moved with a heavy, labored gait. The shape stumbled. It fell into the tall, dead grass. Elias began to run. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt like a trapped bird. The frontier did not forgive mistakes. He ran toward the fallen figure. The snow began to fall in thin, biting needles. As he got closer, his heart sank. It was a woman. She was elderly. She looked frail. She reminded him of a bird with broken wings. Her hair was as white as mountain snow. She wore a dark dress of fine wool. It was expensive. It was the clothing of the city. The hem was shredded. The briars and rocks had torn it to pieces. She was face down in the frozen dirt. The dirt was unforgiving. "Ma'am," Elias called out. His voice cracked with fear. He reached her. He knelt in the dirt. He gently turned her over. Her skin was translucent. It was like fine porcelain. It was deathly cold. Her lips were a terrifying shade of blue. "Help, please," she croaked. The sound was a ghost of a whisper. Elias did not ask questions. He did not think about his own empty belly. He did not think about the bank notice in his pocket. He simply picked her up. She was light. She felt like a bundle of dry kindling. He carried her back toward the cabin. Hattie opened the door wide. Her eyes were huge. They were filled with wonder and fear. "Is she dead, Daddy?" "No, she's just cold, Hattie. Very, very cold." He laid the woman on his own bed. It was the only bed in the house. The room was small. It was one room filled with memories. "Hattie, get the blue blanket," he ordered. "The one your mother made for us." Hattie ran to the cedar chest. She pulled out a thick quilt. It was blue and cream. The fabric was soft. It had been washed 1,000 times. Hattie whispered as she handed it over. "Mommy always wrapped me in this. She said it was a shield against the world." Elias wrapped the stranger in it. He tucked the edges tight. He wanted to trap every ounce of heat. I went to the stove. He threw in his last good oak logs. He ignored the cost. He ignored the coming night. If they froze tomorrow, they would be warm today. The iron stove began to glow. It turned a dull, angry red. He put a pot of water on to boil. He had a small amount of dried beef. He had 2 withered onions. He began to make a broth. He chopped the onions. His hands trembled, but the knife moved with practiced care. This was the food saved for Sunday. This was their only feast. Now it was medicine. It was a sacrifice for a stranger, the cabin filled with a scent. It was the smell of onion and beef. To a starving man, it was the smell of hope. Later that night, the woman groaned. Her eyes fluttered open. They were a soft, intelligent gray. They held the wisdom of a long life. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're at the Thorn Ranch," Elias said. "We're 10 miles outside of Laramie." The woman tried to sit up. She winced. She held her side. "My carriage, the driver, he left me." Elias felt a spark of anger. It burned hot in his gut. "Left you in this weather." She nodded weakly. "He said the axle was broken. He said he'd go for help. But he took both horses. He took the only lantern. He never came back. I saw your light in the window. It was the only star in a dark world." Elias tightened his jaw. The frontier bred a specific kind of cowardice, but it also bred a lion's courage. "What's your name, ma'am?" Hattie asked. The woman smiled. The warmth reached her eyes. "My name is Martha," she said. "And who are you, little one?" "I'm Hattie, and this is my daddy. He's the strongest man in Wyoming." Martha looked at Elias. She saw the holes in his boots. She saw the poverty in the room. She saw the empty shelves. But she saw something else. She saw the love in his eyes. She saw the dignity in his straight back. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Thorne." "Don't thank me yet," Elias muttered. "The storm is coming." The storm broke an hour later. It was not just a snowstorm. It was a blinding wall of wind and snow. The wind hammered the walls. It sounded like 1,000 drums. Snow piled against the door. It formed massive, suffocating drifts. The year 1888 had been cruel. Earlier that year, the schoolhouse blizzard had claimed many lives across the plains. Its memory still haunted every family who watched the winter sky. Now, another early gale had found them. It sealed 3 souls inside. They had barely enough food. They had almost no firewood left. Elias sat in a wooden chair. He stayed by the fire all night. He watched Martha sleep. Hattie curled up at the foot of the bed. He fed the stove. He used one precious stick at a time. He was rationing the heat of their lives. He fed Martha the broth. He gave her the last of his bread. He told himself he wasn't hungry. His stomach cramped. It was a hollow, gnawing pain. Later that night, Hattie watched him. She was in the shadows. She quietly broke her own bread. She slipped half onto her father's plate. She pretended not to notice his hunger. Elias looked at the tiny piece, his eyes filled with tears. He refused to shed them. He silently pushed it back. "Eat, Hattie. You need to grow big and strong." Martha opened her eyes in the dark. She saw the exchange. She saw the silent sacrifice. "You haven't eaten, Elias," she said. "I'm fine, ma'am. I had a big breakfast." "You're a bad liar." "Elias Thorne," she whispered. "I know a man who gives his portion away. I was married to one for 40 years. Elias looked out the window. He watched the white madness. "In this land, you either give everything or you lose everything. There is no middle ground in Wyoming." The next 3 days were a blur. The world outside ceased to exist. The horizon disappeared. Martha grew stronger. She sat up. She shared stories with Hattie. She spoke of Chicago. She spoke of the bright lights of New York. She spoke of a world without dust, a world where people didn't fight for breath. Martha spoke of her own daughter, Julia. Julia was widowed 3 years ago, Martha explained. Her husband built a railroad fortune. The newspapers call her the richest woman in the West. But I fear the wealth has changed her. It has surrounded her with walls. She lives among servants. She lives in a world of silence. She has forgotten how to see the heart. Martha looked toward the small window where snow pressed against the glass. "Julia was not always that way, she said. When she was a girl, she would bring injured birds into the kitchen and hide them beneath her bed. She once gave her winter coat to a washerwoman's daughter and walked home through the snow without one." Hattie leaned closer. "What happened to her?" Martha's smile faded. "Life happened. She married a man named Cornelius Vandermeer. He was not cruel, but he believed every problem could be solved by building something larger. A larger railroad, a larger house, a larger fortune. He loved Julia in the only way he understood. He gave her everything money could buy, but he was rarely home long enough to hear her laugh. Elias placed another thin stick in the stove. And when he died, he left her a fortune large enough to feed towns, Martha said. But he also left her alone in a house with 40 rooms. For 3 years, people have bowed to her. They have praised her dresses. They have asked for loans, positions, and favors. Almost no one has asked whether she sleeps at night. Hattie looked at Martha with solemn eyes. Does she? Not often. Martha answered. She walks through that enormous house after midnight. She checks every locked door. She counts the clocks as they strike. But she has forgotten what she is searching for. Elias remained silent. He knew something about walking through dark rooms and listening for a voice that would never answer. Martha studied him from beneath the quilt. You and my daughter are not as different as you think. Elias gave a humorless laugh. She lives among marble walls. I live under a roof that leaks. Loneliness does not care what kind of roof covers it, Martha replied. The words settled between them. Outside, the storm clawed at the cabin. Inside, neither Elias nor Martha spoke again for several minutes. Hattie rested her head against the edge of the bed. Maybe Julia just needs someone who doesn't want her money, she whispered. Martha looked at Elias. For the first time since waking, a small spark of hope appeared in her eyes. Perhaps she does, child. Perhaps she does. Elias listened while he worked. He dug a path to the barn. The drifts were 5 feet high. He spent his nights worrying. The territory was changing. The open range was closing. Men like Judge Sterling wanted his land. They wanted the water rights. The judge used the law like a whip. He had no mercy for the poor. On the 4th day, the sun appeared. The world was a piercing, brilliant blue. The silence was absolute. Suddenly, a rhythmic jingling broke the air. A massive black sleigh pulled up. It was pulled by 4 matching horses. They were charcoal black against the poor cabin. It looked like wealth from another world. A woman stepped out. She was striking rather than delicate. Her beauty carried the distance of someone who had forgotten how to trust. She wore a deep blue velvet dress. She had a cloak of silver fox. Her eyes were the color of pond ice. The woman marched toward Elias. She didn't offer a greeting. Is she here? She demanded. My mother, Martha. She disappeared 4 days ago. The cabin door opened. Martha stepped out slowly. She leaned on Hattie's shoulder. I'm right here, Julia, Martha said. The woman in blue gasped. She ran to her mother. Mother, thank God. I thought you were dead in a ditch. Martha patted her daughter's back. But she kept her eyes on Elias. I would be a frozen memory if not for this man. He found me in the grass. He gave me his only bed. He gave me his last food while he starved. Julia pulled back. She looked at Elias. Her eyes were searching and skeptical. She saw the dirt under his nails. She saw the rough, calloused hands. She reached into her silk purse. She pulled out a thick roll of bills. It was more money than Elias had ever seen. It was more than the ranch was worth. Thank you for your hospitality, Julia said. She held the money out. She held it like a shield. This should cover your trouble. Elias looked at the money. He thought of the bank notice. I thought of Hattie's worn shoes and threadbare winter coat. This money could pay the debt. It could save their entire future. Then he looked at Martha. He saw the disappointment in her eyes. She was watching her daughter. She was mourning her daughter's soul. Elias looked back at Julia. No, he said. His voice was steady. It was as firm as the mountains. Julia blinked. I beg your pardon. This is more than enough to fix this hovel. You could buy a new life. Elias's eyes hardened. They turned into flint. I didn't take her in for money. In Wyoming, we don't charge for mercy.
If Elias's act of mercy has touched your heart, tell us in the comments what kindness means to you.
And stay with us, because the wealthy widow standing before him is about to make a choice that will change all 4 of their lives. If I took that, I'd be selling my soul. And my soul belongs to God. God and my daughter. Julia waved the bills. She was frustrated. She was confused by his pride. Don't be stubborn. Look at your boots. Look at your daughter's clothes. Hattie flinched at the word hovel. She clutched her rag doll. It's my home, Elias said, and my dignity isn't for sale. Not to the bank, and certainly not to you, Julia scoffed. Why, you are choosing to suffer. You are choosing to be poor. Mother, let's go. The sleigh is waiting. But Martha did not move. She sat back down in the porch chair. I'm staying for lunch, Julia, and you are staying too. Mother, We have a suite at the hotel. I don't care about the hotel. I care about the truth. Mr. Thorne, do you have enough for 2 more? Elias thought of his pantry. He had a half cup of beans left. I have beans and well water, he said. It's shared honestly. That's all I can offer. Inside, Julia watched Elias work. She saw him refill the bowls. He served everyone else first. She saw there was nothing left for him. She saw Hattie scrape her bowl. The child was careful. She didn't waste a single bite. It broke something inside Julia. She had lived around waste. She had lived around greed. She had never seen grace like this. Why aren't you eating? Julia asked, where her voice had lost its edge. I'm not hungry, Elias said. He turned away. He didn't want her to see his hands shake. He's been saying that for days, Martha said. He gave me his bed, Julia. He slept on the hard floor. He gave me his wife's own quilt. Julia touched the blue blanket. She closed her eyes. It smelled of old lavender. It smelled of sacrifice. I'm sorry, Julia whispered. Elias looked up. For what, Mrs. Vandermeer? For thinking I could buy you? For thinking money was the only currency? Hattie looked from Julia to the empty pot. Miss Julia, she said quietly, do rich people ever get hungry? Julia seemed startled by the question. Everyone gets hungry, child. Hattie shook her head. I don't mean for food. The cabin became very still. Julia slowly lowered herself onto the wooden chair beside the girl. What kind of hunger do you mean? The kind Daddy has at night? Hattie said. He sits by the stove after he thinks I'm asleep. He holds Mama's quilt and looks at the door. I think he is waiting for someone. Elias turned sharply. Hattie? The child lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, Daddy. Julia looked toward the faded quilt resting around Martha's shoulders. For the first time, she understood that Elias's poverty was not the emptiest thing in the cabin. There was an absence here that no money could fill. Julia reached for the edge of the quilt. Was your mother kind? She asked Hattie. Hattie nodded. She sang when she needed bread, even when there wasn't enough flour. She said a house should hear music when it is hungry, Julia swallowed. Her own house had contained grand pianos, imported carpets, and musicians hired for dinner parties. Yet she could not remember the last time anyone had sung simply because they were grateful to be alive. What did she sing? Julia asked. Hattie began softly. The melody was simple and uncertain. Her small voice trembled on the higher notes. Elias stood with his back to them. His shoulders stiffened. It was Sarah's song. He had not heard it since the night before she died. Hattie forgot one of the lines. Julia unexpectedly supplied it. Elias turned. You know that hymn? My father sang it when I was a girl, Julia said. My mother and I used to join him by the kitchen fire. Martha smiled through gathering tears. For a time, our house had music too. Julia looked down at her hands. The soft white gloves suddenly seemed like the hands of a stranger. She removed them. Then she reached for the stack of dirty bowls. What are you doing? Elias asked. Washing the dishes. You don't have to. I know. Julia carried the bowls to the basin. She rolled up the sleeves of her velvet dress. Her first attempt sent water across the table and onto the floor. Hattie laughed before covering her mouth. Julia looked at the puddle. Then, to everyone's surprise, she laughed too. It was not the careful laugh she used in drawing rooms. It was warm, unguarded, and almost young. Martha closed her eyes for a moment. She had feared that sound was gone forever. Elias handed Julia a cloth. You start with the least dirty bowl, he said. Otherwise, you turn all the water to mud. Julia accepted the cloth. Then perhaps you should teach me. Their fingers touched briefly. Neither pulled away at once. Hattie noticed. So did Martha. But both wisely said nothing. The meal was quiet. The air in the cabin changed. The tension melted. Julia did not speak for several minutes. For perhaps the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel ashamed without trying to hide it behind money. Julia listened to Martha. They talked about Hattie. They talked about the girl's dreams. Hattie wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to read every book in the world. Julia saw the way Elias looked at her. It was a look of pure devotion. When lunch was over, Julia stood up. I'm staying in Laramie, she announced. I want to understand this place. I want to know how a man survives on integrity. Elias was confused. The road is rough, ma'am. It's no place for velvet. Then I will find some cotton, she replied. Over the next few weeks, Julia returned. She didn't bring the sleigh. She rode a single horse. She wore simple clothes. On one clear afternoon, Julia arrived in her blue dress and stood in the yard below the porch. Martha watched from behind Elias as he and Julia held each other's gaze across the last few steps between them. She helped Martha cook. She helped Hattie with her lessons. Little by little, Elias lowered his guard. He stopped seeing her as a threat. Trust did not arrive all at once. It came in small, quiet pieces. It came the morning Julia appeared before sunrise with flour on her sleeve because she had tried to bake bread with Martha. The loaf was uneven and hard at the edges. Elias ate 2 slices without complaint. It came when she sat beside Hattie on the porch and patiently helped her sound out the words in an old school book. It came when she noticed a tear in Elias's coat and mended it without telling him. He discovered the repair 3 days later. The stitches were crooked, but they held. At first, Julia returned to the hotel each evening. Then an early storm blocked the road. Martha insisted that she remain at the cabin. Elias slept in the barn so Julia and Hattie could share the bed. During the night, Julia woke to the sound of wind under the door. She found Hattie sitting near the cold stove with the rag doll in her lap. "Did the storm wake you?" Julia asked. Hattie shook her head. "I dreamed Daddy was gone." Julia sat beside her. "He is only in the barn. Mama was only in the other room once," Hattie whispered. Then she wasn't. Julia did not offer an easy promise. She knew what it meant to lose someone between one breath and the next. Instead, she wrapped the blue quilt around them both. "I cannot promise that the people we love will never leave us," she said. "But I can promise you will not face tonight alone." Hattie leaned against her. After a moment, the child placed the rag doll in Julia's lap. "Her name is Hope." Julia looked at the worn little face. "That is a fine name. Mama made her—" Hattie hesitated. "You can hold her until morning." Julia's eyes filled. No expensive jewel had ever been offered to her with such trust. At dawn, Elias entered the cabin. He found Julia sleeping upright beside the stove. Hattie rested against her shoulder. The blue quilt covered them both. Hope lay safely between their hands. Elias stood silently in the doorway. For the first time, he did not see a railroad widow or a woman from another world. He saw someone protecting his child. Julia opened her eyes. Their gazes met. "I didn't want to wake her," she whispered. Elias looked at Hattie's peaceful face. "She hasn't slept that deeply since her mother died." Julia lowered her voice. "She is afraid of losing you." "I know. So are you," Julia said. Elias's expression tightened. "Fear doesn't put food on a table." "No," Julia replied. "But pretending you feel nothing will not keep her safe either." He looked toward the window. The sunrise painted the snow pale gold. "I love Sarah," he said. "I still do." "I would never ask you not to," Julia answered. He turned back to her. There was no jealousy in her face, only understanding. "My husband was a good man, she continued, "but we lived beside each other more than we lived together. When he died, I mourned him. I also mourned the life we never learned how to share." Elias sat in the chair across from her. For a long time, they spoke quietly about the dead, not as rivals, not as ghosts standing between them, but as people who had shaped the hearts they still carried. When Hattie woke, she found them sitting near the stove. Her father was smiling. It was a small smile, but it was real. They spoke on the porch in the evenings. The sun would set. The sky would turn a violent purple. "I see a future here, Elias," Julia said. "The land is beautiful, but it is hard." "I owe the bank $800, Elias admitted. The confession tasted like ash. "It is a mountain I cannot climb." "The judge will take the land by Christmas. My attorneys bought your mortgage, though," Julia said. "The terms have not changed," she added quickly. "You still own this ranch, and you will repay every dollar on terms we agree upon together." Elias stood up abruptly. His eyes turned to flint again. "I told you no charity." "Wait," she countered. She stood her ground. "It's not charity. It's an investment. I secured approval for a school. The lumber arrives tomorrow. I want to build it here, on your land. My mother wants to teach again. She wants to inspire one more generation. We will be partners. Elias, equal partners. You provide the land and the labor. I provide the capital. Hattie will be the first student." Elias looked at Hattie. She was playing in the dirt. He saw a future without hunger. He saw a legacy. "Partner," he whispered. Julia held out her hand. Elias looked at it for a long moment. It was a hand, accustomed to signing contracts and directing men who never questioned her. But now it waited for his answer. He took it. Her palm was softer than his, yet her grip was steady. Partners, she repeated. The next morning, the first lumber wagon appeared on the eastern road. Then came another. By noon, 6 wagons stood beside the pasture. Men unloaded pine boards, tools, iron nails, windows, and a small brass bell. Hattie circled the bell in wonder. Will I ring it? If you finish your lessons, Martha said, I will finish every lesson. The work attracted attention from the surrounding valley. Some families welcomed the school. Others distrusted Julia's money. A rancher named Amos Reed rode over and watched Elias mark the foundation. Rich people don't build something for nothing, Amos warned. She'll own your land before spring. Elias drove a stake into the frozen soil. The agreement is written. She provides the capital. I provide the land and labor. And when she changes her mind, Elias looked toward Julia. She was carrying boards with 2 workers despite the mud staining her dress. Then I will answer for my choice. Amos shook his head and rode away. Julia had heard every word. That evening, she found Elias repairing a harness in the barn. You could have told him I would never take the ranch. Words are easy, Elias said. Time will prove what kind of partner you are. The answer stung her, but she knew he was right. So Julia stayed. She learned to sort nails by size. She carried water to the workers. She burned the first pot of coffee she attempted to make over an outdoor fire. The men drank it anyway because Elias was watching. By the end of the week, her velvet gloves had been replaced by leather ones. A blister opened across her palm. Elias noticed when she tried to hide it. Sit down, he said. I can continue. Sit, she obeyed. He cleaned the blister and wrapped her hand with a narrow strip of cloth. You don't have to prove yourself by bleeding. Julia watched his careful fingers. Isn't that what you have done your entire life? Elias paused. Perhaps that is why I know it is a poor bargain. Their eyes met. The unfinished walls around them creaked in the evening wind. For a moment, the workers and hammers seemed very far away. Then Hattie ran into the building. Daddy, Miss Julia, come see. She led them to a wooden board near the entrance. Martha had written 4 names in charcoal. Martha Julia. Elias Hattie beneath them. Hattie had added 1 uneven word, home. Julia touched the letters. Who taught you to spell that? Daddy, Hattie smiled. He said home is the place where nobody eats alone. Elias looked embarrassed. I said something close to that. Julia looked around the unfinished school. Sunlight streamed through the empty window frames. She imagined children reading there. She imagined Martha ringing the bell. She imagined returning to the cabin each evening and seeing Elias waiting on the porch. For the first time. The future did not resemble a larger house or another railroad. It resembled 4 names written in charcoal on a pine board. By November, the work had become grueling. The unfinished school stood exposed to the growing cold. An old cottonwood stood by the site. Its limbs were bowed with ice, but Judge Sterling was not done. He rode out with 2 deputies. This is illegal, Thorne. You don't have the permits. Julia stepped out of the dust. Her face was smudged with dirt. Her hands were rough. I have the permits. Judge, I own the mortgage now, and I have the governor's backing. Sterling glared at them. He saw the power in Julia's eyes. I saw the strength in Elias's grip. He wheeled his horse and left. He never challenged the school again. Some battles were lost long before a judge admitted defeat, but the frontier had one more test. Winter hit with a vengeance in December. A massive ice storm arrived. It encased the world in glass. A giant branch snapped. Son. It was from the old cottonwood. It fell toward the school roof. Elias ran into the freezing dark. He had to save the building. He climbed a slick ladder. He tried to brace the beam, but the ice was treacherous. The ladder slipped. Elias crashed to the ground. The heavy branch pinned his leg. Julia reached him first. She fell to her knees in the slush. Elias, speak to me. She didn't wait for help. She wedged a timber beneath the branch. It lifted just enough. Martha, she cried. Dar. Together, they freed Elias's leg before guiding him onto the sled behind the old mare. Hattie held the mare steady while Martha and Julia secured Elias on the sled. Together, they guided him through the storm and brought him safely inside. For 3 days, Elias fought a fever. He dreamed of Sarah. He dreamed of an empty pantry. Julia never left him. She bathed his brow. She whispered to him. On the fourth day, he woke up. The first thing he saw was Julia. She looked exhausted. She looked beautiful. Did the roof hold? She laughed through her tears. Yes, Elias. The roof held firm, just like you. Spring finally came. The meadowlarks returned. The schoolhouse was finished. It was a beacon of white wood. It was a monument to hope. Elias walked with a limp, but his heart was light. He made his first payment to Julia. It was honest money. It was earned from the soil. On the first day of school, Martha rang the bell. The sound echoed across the plains. Children came from miles away. Some came on ponies, some walked barefoot. Amos Reed arrived with his 2 grandsons. He removed his hat before Martha. I was wrong, he admitted quietly. This valley needed this school more than another pasture. Elias simply smiled and held the door open. Hattie sat in the front row. She wore a new dress, but she kept her rag doll. She never forgot where she came from. July 10th, 1890 arrived. Word reached them by telegraph. President Harrison had signed the bill. Wyoming was the 44th state. It was a historic day. Wyoming entered the Union while preserving the voting rights women had held in the territory since 1869. The equality state was born. That evening, they gathered. The feast was grand. There was beef and fresh bread. No one was hungry. Elias walked to the porch. He looked at the stars. They seemed closer in the mountain air. He felt Julia's hand on his arm. Tomorrow, I'd like to ask you something I've been afraid to ask since the first day you stayed for beans instead of returning to your hotel. Julia's eyes widened. The coldness was gone forever. I've been waiting for that question. Elias. The mountains stood silent. They had seen the struggle. They had seen the survival. The schoolhouse lamp glowed. It was a light that would never go out. Beside him stood a woman who learned to see, a mother who never lost faith, and a girl who was no longer afraid. Winter had taken many things from Elias. His youth, his certainty, and years before, the woman he loved most. But kindness had given him a family. Dignity had given him a future. The frontier was hard. But the human heart could endure even more. It could break, but it could also heal. In the healing, it became stronger than iron. It became as vast as the Wyoming sky. Thank you for listening. Wherever life carries you, may you always find a home where kindness is worth more than gold. Until we meet again on the trail, God bless you, and goodbye.